Hello, everyone. During my Zoom meeting yesterday, I had a very good question from a student who had reviewed the information from Chapter 6 and had a little bit of confusion about some of the hypothesis information. Specifically, sometimes it's hard to tell if an intervention or the independent variable is one thing or two things. Are we looking at multiple independents? Are we looking at multiple dependents? So I thought it would be good to just do a quick little recording with some extra practice hypotheses that I'll walk you through, kind of explain the process of how you would break this information apart, because you're definitely going to have questions like this on exam 1. So you really need to understand this information. So I'm going to go jump right on in. I don't want this to be a super long recording. So first of all, here is one example, and I did just grab some journals this morning and pulled these straight from real studies. So the first hypothesis example says, levels of adolescent girls' physical activity, self-efficacy, and physical activity enjoyment will be positively associated with accelerometer measured moderate to vigorous physical activity. Oh, that's a mouthful. There's a lot going on. So if you don't understand exactly what you read, sometimes it's best to kind of play around with it and put this in your own words. So basically, this study was looking at girls who were in middle school who were at risk for obesity, and they specifically asked them, they gave them a questionnaire, how for self-efficacy, do you believe in yourself? Do you believe that you are able to participate and make a difference with physical activity? That's what physical activity self-efficacy means. So that was a survey that they gave to the adolescent girls. The other piece of the information was their physical activity enjoyment. That was a second survey that they gave them, and they asked them if they enjoyed participating in different types of physical activity. And it wasn't just all like aerobics and things like that. They had various different types of activities that they surveyed them on. And then they also had them wear an accelerometer, which is like a or a tracking device that measures movement. And they used that to collect data on how many minutes the girls had in moderate to vigorous physical activity throughout the day. So those are our main variables. So the first thing that I usually do when I look at these kinds of hypotheses is look for the outcome first. Sometimes it's easier to find the outcome or the dependent variable and work backwards. So remember, the outcome is what we're interested in and really interested in. What is going to make these girls more active? That's what we want to know. And then we're studying various other independent variables to see how they influence or affect the outcome. So for this example, our outcome or our dependent variable is the accelerometer measured physical activity. So how much activity did these girls have? That's our outcome. That is just one thing. So we have one dependent variable. That's our single independent variable. So now we kind of work backwards and we see, okay, what other things did they measure or collect data on that they're thinking have an effect or an influence on their amount of activity? And we can see that there are actually two independent variables. The first is their level of self-efficacy. Do they believe in themselves? You know, if I don't believe in myself and think that I don't have what it takes to be physically active and I don't think it's going to make a difference, then I'm probably not going to be physically active. So that's one thing that influences our outcome. The other thing that influences our outcome is whether they enjoyed physical activity. If they hated it and thought it was drudgery, then they're probably not going to do it. So there's two independent variables, their self-efficacy and their enjoyment of physical activity. And the researchers are thinking that both of those things are going to have an impact on their actual level of activity. So we have two independent variables, we have one dependent variable. So we can now move forward to, is this simple or is this complex? And if you recall from the information I've already posted on Moodle, in order to be a simple hypothesis, it has to have exactly one independent and exactly one dependent. If there are multiples of any of those, then it automatically becomes complex. So for this specific example, it is a complex hypothesis because we have two independents and one dependent. So it's a complex hypothesis. Now we move to, is it directional or non-directional? And remember, we're looking for those movement words. So increase, decrease, more, less, greater, less than, etc. So we can see that there is positive association. So that's telling me a direction. That means higher self-efficacy, higher activity levels, higher enjoyment, higher activity levels, positive correlation. We'll learn that specifically in chapter 14, but for now, we can see that movement. It's a positive direction, increasing. So we know that that is a directional hypothesis. And then if you recall from the chapter 6 recording, research versus null. If we are saying in any way, shape, or form that these variables are related to each other, they influence each other, then it's definitely research. So this is definitely a research hypothesis because I'm saying that I believe self-efficacy and physical activity are going to have an impact. Okay. The next example, multivitamin supplements that contain vitamin B6, B12, and folic acid will have an effect on cognitive function levels of elderly with mild, I'm supposed to say older adults, with mild cognitive impairment living in aged care facilities. So here again, what is our outcome? That's the easiest place to start. So we're looking at changes in mild cognitive, cognitive function. So their level of cognitive function is our outcome. It's one thing. Don't fall into the trap that I just did really quickly. Elderly with mild cognitive impairment living in aged care facilities is not a variable. That's the population. Every single person in our study is going to be an older adult who has already mild cognitive impairment and lives in an aged care facility. So because everybody in the study is going to meet those criteria, it's not a variable because it doesn't vary. Everybody's the same. So the level of cognitive function is our outcome or our dependent variable. So what are the research would have an impact on the level of cognitive function? And the answer is the use of multivitamin supplements. They either take them or they don't. Okay, don't look at this and say, oh, wait, Miss Barrow, there's 3 different vitamins. There's a B6, B12, and folic acid. This is a multivitamin, so it contains all of those in one capsule, maybe 2 capsules. But so the variable is some people are going to take the multivitamin, some people are not going to take the multivitamin. That's one thing. So we have one independent variable, we have one dependent variable. So that makes this a simple hypothesis because there is 1 and 1. Is this directional or non-directional? Refer back to the hypothesis. Are there words that denote movement and which way the variables are related? And the answer is no. It's just saying that use of supplements is going to have an effect on their cognitive function, but it's not necessarily going to tell us which way the effect is going to happen. So it's non-directional. And is this a research or a null hypothesis? This is a research hypothesis because even though it's non-directional, I'm still telling you that use of multivitamins is going to influence or impact cognitive function. So it is a research hypothesis. So now on the next slide, it almost looks exactly the same. I added one little blurb to make it different so you could see how to approach these things. So multivitamin supplements containing B6, B12, folic acid, same thing, will have an effect on cognitive function and depression levels of older adults with mild cognitive impairment living in aged care facilities. So the only thing I added was this and depression levels of elderly. So now we are looking at dependent variables, 2 of them. We still have the level of cognitive function, but now we added depression levels. So we're collecting data on a separate outcome. So we have 2 dependents. We still have the 1 independent. Do they use the multivitamin or do they not? So now it is not simple anymore. It's a complex hypothesis because I have 1 independent, but I have 2 dependents. So we no longer meet the 1 and 1 rule. So it automatically becomes complex. I didn't change any of the other wording, so this is still non-directional. I'm not telling you what kind of effect it's going to have. It's still research because I'm still telling you that the multivitamin usage is going to influence in some way those now two dependent variables. Okay, I have two more. Nurse faculty who have a doctoral degree will have higher levels of foundational genomic knowledge than nurse faculty without a doctoral degree, as measured by the Genomic Nursing Concept Inventory. This is actually a really interesting study I just read yesterday. So what is our dependent variable? What's our outcome we're interested in? It's the level of genomic knowledge. So does the faculty really understand foundations of genomics? Because, I mean, frankly, if we're going to be teaching that, we probably should understand it, right? So the level of the faculty's genomic knowledge is our dependent variable. And what are we saying is going to influence that? What is our independent variable? It's their education level. So they either have a doctorate or they don't. That's not two different variables. That's one. It's level of education. And the possible options would be doctorate, non-doctorate. So it's one independent variable, one dependent variable. So it's a simple hypothesis because we have one and one. So now we get to directional and non-directional, and we can say for sure that this is directional because I see the word higher. So I'm telling you that I do believe that more education equals more foundational knowledge of genomics. So I'm telling you the direction of the movement. So basically, here's a little cheat sheet. Anytime you have a directional hypothesis, you can 100% of the time know it's a research hypothesis because I'm for certain telling you which way the movement's going to go between these variables. So that's for sure a research hypothesis. And the last one. Among emergency department nurses who have experienced physical or verbal violence from patients or patient families, nurses with higher levels of extroversion and peer support will demonstrate higher levels of resilience. This is actually something I'm very interested in, that concept of resilience, or the ability to combat levels of stress and come back to a level of homeostasis and equilibrium in the body. It's actually really something that fascinates me. So in this one, don't get distracted by the population. The population under study are all going to be ER nurses who have experienced some form of violence from patients or families. That's not a variable. Everybody has that. So you can almost, this whole little introductory section, just don't even look at it because there's no variables. That's the population. So with everything after the comma, what is our outcome of interest, our dependent variable? The answer is the level of resilience. So do these nurses have resilience to overcome stress associated with these violent attacks from families or patients? So we have one dependent variable. It is resilience levels. So then we look at what is the researcher saying has an impact on resilience. And the answer is there's actually two independent variables. One is level of extroversion. That's a personality characteristic. So that would be like an extroverted person, more outside themselves, as opposed to an introvert who's more inside their head. So they're saying that if you are more of an extrovert, you're going to have better resilience, basically. And just FYI, there's research to support that. The second independent variable is their level of peer support. So do they feel that they have adequate support within their work group, within their work peers? So we have two independent variables, extroversion, peer support. Those are probably going to be some kind of survey tool that they use to collect data. And then there's one dependent variable, which is the level of resilience, which is also going to be some kind of survey instrument. So because we have two and one, this is a complex hypothesis. It is definitely directional because I'm telling you these keywords like higher levels of extroversion, higher levels of resilience, or higher levels of peer support, higher levels of resilience. So it is directional, and that automatically makes it a research hypothesis. So I didn't put any examples of null hypotheses just because sometimes those are a little bit more complicated. You can tell the variables, but they're always going to be non-directional because we're saying there's no relationship. But please hear me. Non-directional hypotheses are not always null. If we're saying there's a relationship and we're just not using direction words, it's still a research hypothesis. Remember, a null hypothesis says there is no effect or no influence or relationship at all between variable 1 and variable 2. They're completely separate things. If it doesn't say that, then it is definitely a research hypothesis. And I don't know if you heard my inbox blowing up, but I think I got like 12 emails during this presentation. So if you heard the dings, I apologize, but sorry about that. All right, so hopefully this helped. I just put this together real quickly this morning, but hopefully this is helpful as we get closer to exam 1. This is a supplement to the other information I have posted. Don't just watch this and expect to do well on the test. You do need to understand the basic textbook content as well. This is just an extra practice and an extra explanation to help it make more sense to you. So thanks for taking the time to watch.